September 29, 1940. The Boac, a flying boat, banked low over the Potomac River as it approached Bowling Field, Washington District of Columbia. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, Sir Henry Tizard clutched a locked metal box that contained what would prove to be the most valuable cargo ever transported across the Atlantic Ocean. The box, barely larger than a hat box, held a copper cavity magnetron, serial number 12, manufactured at the University of Birmingham just 3 weeks earlier. This single device, weighing less than 8 pounds, represented Britain's most closely guarded military secret. It could generate microwave radiation at power levels 10,000 times greater than anything American scientists believed possible. Tizard, Britain's most respected scientific administrator, had crossed submarine-infested waters during the darkest days of the Battle of Britain, carrying technology that Winston Churchill himself had authorized for transfer. The British Scientific Mission, officially designated the British Technical and Scientific Mission, but known forever as the Tizard Mission, had come to America not as conquerors sharing victory, but as desperate survivors offering their most precious secrets in exchange for American industrial might. What made this moment particularly bitter for British pride was that just 2 years earlier, American military observers had toured Britain's radar installations and dismissed them as primitive curiosities, interesting experiments that would never prove practical for military use. United States Army Signal Corps officers had literally laughed at Britain's chain-home radar system with its enormous wooden towers and ungainly appearance. Now, with London burning under Luftwaffe bombardment and Britain fighting alone against Nazi Germany, those same Americans would discover that the technology they had mocked was the only thing standing between Western civilization and total defeat. More humiliatingly still, they would beg for access to British radar secrets, acknowledging that American technology lagged years behind British achievement. The story of how America mocked Britain's radar, then begged for it in 1940, reveals the dangers of technological arrogance, the value of desperate innovation, and the moment when American military establishment confronted the uncomfortable truth that in at least one critical field they were hopelessly behind. The roots of British radar superiority stretched back to 1935, when Robert Watson Watt demonstrated that radio waves could detect aircraft. The Air Ministry, facing the terrifying prospect of German bomber fleets that could reach London in minutes, invested heavily in what they called radio direction finding, later known as radar. By 1938, Britain had constructed the chain-home system, a network of radar stations along the eastern and southern coasts. These installations featured massive steel towers, some reaching 360 feet high, supporting antenna arrays that could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles. The system was crude by later standards. It operated at relatively low frequencies, around 20 to 30 megahertz, giving it poor resolution. The equipment filled entire buildings, required constant manual tuning, and depended on operators plotting aircraft positions on map tables. But it worked, providing 20 to 30 minutes warning of incoming raids, the difference between survival and annihilation for fighter defenses. In May 1938, the United States Army Air Corps sent a technical mission to Britain to evaluate European aviation developments. Among the delegation was Major Hoyt Vandenberg, who would later become Air Force Chief of Staff, and several Signal Corps technical officers. The British, eager to impress potential allies, arranged tours of chain-home stations. What the Americans saw confirmed all their prejudices about British eccentricity. The radar towers were obviously vulnerable to bombing. The equipment looked like jury-rigged laboratory apparatus, not military hardware. The operators, many of them young women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, seemed barely trained. Major Vandenberg's classified report filed in June 1938 was devastating. The British radio detection system, while ingenious in concept, appears impractical for military application. The equipment is too large, too fragile, and requires too much skilled operation to be useful under combat conditions. The towers represent enormous targets that enemy bombardment could easily destroy. More damning still was the assessment from Signal Corps Lieutenant Colonel James O'Connell, who commanded the United States Army's own primitive radar research program at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. The British have pursued an interesting but ultimately futile technological dead end. Their low-frequency approach will never provide sufficient resolution for practical fire control. We are pursuing the correct path with higher frequencies and mobile equipment. These assessments reflected genuine American belief that their approach to radar development was superior. United States research emphasized higher frequencies, smaller equipment, and mobility. The massive British installations seemed primitive throwbacks to an earlier technological era. The American Signal Corps had begun radar experiments in 1936, 2 years after British efforts started. But American development proceeded slowly. Constrained by minimal funding and skepticism from military leadership that doubted radio could detect aircraft reliably. By 1939, American radar development had produced the SCR-268, a mobile system mounted on trucks. It operated at frequencies around 200 megahertz, much higher than British systems, theoretically providing better resolution. In practice, the equipment was unreliable, had limited range, and worked poorly in rain or fog. American researchers were proud of their sophisticated approach, convinced that scientific elegance would triumph over British brute force engineering. The notion that Britain's crude system might actually be more effective never occurred to them. The first crack in American confidence appeared in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. American military attachés observed the campaign closely, noting German success in overcoming Polish defenses despite advance warning. If Poland, with considerable intelligence about German intentions, couldn't prevent defeat, how could anyone? But Britain and France declared war on Germany, and suddenly the question of how to defend against air attack became urgent. The British claimed their radar system had been operational for a year, providing comprehensive coverage of approaches to England. American observers remained skeptical. Commander Robert Briscoe, United States Navy liaison officer in London, attended an Air Ministry briefing in November 1939, where Wing Commander Frederick Brundrett explained the chain-home system. Briscoe's report to Washington acknowledged the system's existence but questioned its military value. The British radar network may provide early warning of approaching aircraft formations. However, the equipment's vulnerability to jamming, its inability to provide accurate altitude information, and its fixed nature limit its military utility. German electronic countermeasures will likely render the system ineffective in actual combat. This assessment reflected American assumption that any system could be defeated through electronic warfare. What Briscoe and other observers missed was that Britain had developed the world's first integrated air defense system, combining radar detection with fighter control, observer corps reports, and centralized command. The system wasn't just about detecting aircraft. It was about translating detection into effective fighter interception, a problem far more complex than simply building better radar equipment. Britain had solved this integration challenge through desperate necessity. America, facing no immediate threat, saw only the crude technological components. The Battle of Britain shattered American assumptions with brutal finality. Beginning in July 1940, the Luftwaffe launched systematic attacks against British airfields and cities, seeking to destroy the Royal Air Force as a prelude to invasion. Fighter command, outnumbered and outgunned, somehow held. Luftwaffe losses mounted to unsustainable levels. By September, Germany abandoned daylight bombing raids, tacitly acknowledging defeat. The invasion of England, Operation Sea Lion, was postponed indefinitely. American military observers struggled to understand how the British had survived. The Royal Air Force's fighters, Hurricanes, and Spitfires were good, but not obviously superior to German Messerschmitt 109s. British pilots were brave, but no braver than Germans. Numerically, the Luftwaffe possessed overwhelming advantages. The answer lay in the technology Americans had mocked. The chain-home radar system detected every German raid forming over France, providing 20 to 30 minutes warning. This warning time allowed fighter command to scramble interceptors precisely when needed, rather than maintaining standing patrols that exhausted pilots and aircraft. More critically, the integrated command system meant British fighters consistently appeared at the right place and right time to intercept raids. German formations that expected to surprise British airfields found Spitfires waiting at altitude. German bombers approaching cities encountered fighters that had climbed to intercept them. The mathematics were undeniable. Britain's 40 to 50 serviceable fighters at any given time, directed by radar and centralized command, proved more effective than Germany's 800-plus fighters operating without comparable direction systems. Major General Delos Emmons, commanding the United States Army Air Force's Air Defense Organization, visited England in August 1940 at the height of the battle. His classified report, filed in September, represented complete reversal of earlier American assessments. The British radar system, which our earlier evaluations dismissed as impractical, has proven decisively effective in combat. It provides reliable warning of raids, enabling efficient use of limited fighter resources. Without this system, British defenses would have collapsed weeks ago. We must immediately acquire full details of British radar technology and integrate similar capabilities into our own air defenses. This admission that British technology actually worked and that American evaluations had been completely wrong humiliated the Signal Corps establishment, but worse humiliation was coming. Even as Emmons wrote his report, British scientists were preparing to share technology far more advanced than the chain-home system. The cavity magnetron represented a quantum leap in radar capability that would revolutionize electronic warfare. The device had been invented in February 1940 by John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham. Working under pressure to develop higher-frequency radar for aircraft interception and anti-submarine warfare, they created a vacuum tube that could generate powerful microwave radiation at wavelengths around 10 centimeters. This breakthrough solved radar's fundamental limitation. Lower-frequency systems like chain-home had poor resolution, unable to accurately determine target size, altitude, or precise position. Higher-frequency microwave radar could detect small targets, provide precise ranging, and work from compact equipment. The cavity magnetron generated 10 kilowatts of continuous microwave power, 10,000 times more than existing klystron tubes. This power level enabled radar systems small enough to fit in aircraft or ships while still detecting targets at useful ranges. By summer 1940, British researchers had demonstrated airborne radar using cavity magnetrons that could detect submarine periscopes from aircraft. They had developed naval fire control radar that could aim guns in total darkness. They had created ground-based systems that could vector night fighters onto German bombers with precision impossible for chain-home. Britain possessed the world's most advanced radar technology by extraordinary margin. But Britain also faced potential invasion and lacked the industrial capacity to exploit this technology fully. America had the industry, but lacked the technology. Churchill and his scientific advisors made the painful decision to share Britain's most secret technology with the United States in exchange for American production capacity. The man chosen to lead this mission was Henry Tizard, chairman of the Aeronautical Research Committee and Britain's most trusted scientific administrator. Tizard had driven British radar development since 1935, pushing for practical systems over theoretical elegance. In August 1940, Tizard assembled a small team of Britain's finest scientists and engineers. The delegation included John Cockcroft, who would win the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1951, Edward Bowen, who developed airborne radar, and several other specialists. Their instructions from Churchill were simple but unprecedented. Share everything, every British radar secret, every development, every experimental result. Hold nothing back. American industrial capacity was essential to winning the war, and technology was Britain's only valuable bargaining chip. The delegation departed England on August 15, 1940, aboard a steamship that joined a convoy to Canada. They carried cavity magnetron number 12, complete technical drawings, working models of British radar equipment, details of the chain-home system, specifications for airborne and naval radar, proximity fuse designs, and dozens of other military technologies. The cargo's value was literally incalculable. It represented 5 years of British research conducted under wartime urgency, innovations that had cost millions of pounds and thousands of man-hours. Britain was giving it all away, betting survival on American goodwill and industrial capacity. If you're fascinated by the hidden technological battles that shaped World War II and want to discover more incredible stories about the inventions that changed history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode where we reveal the surprising truth behind the machines and innovations that won the war. The Tizard Mission arrived in Washington on September 6, 1940. Their reception was cordial but cautious. American military officials, burned by earlier enthusiasm for British claims, approached the delegation skeptically. The first demonstration occurred on September 29th at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington. Tizard unpacked cavity magnetron number 12 and connected it to measuring equipment. When he activated the device, American scientists literally gasped. The power output exceeded their instrument's measuring capacity. Dr. Alfred Loomis, the wealthy physicist who chaired the United States National Defense Research Committee's Microwave Committee, immediately recognized the magnetron's significance. This changes everything. With this power level, we can build radar systems we only dreamed about. Shipborne fire control, airborne interception, anti-submarine detection all suddenly become practical. Dr. Luis Alvarez, who would win the Nobel Prize in 1968 and was present at the demonstration, later recalled the moment. When the British brought us the cavity magnetron, it was the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. It triggered the radio and electronics revolution that continues today. American skepticism evaporated instantly. Within hours, the United States military establishment that had mocked British radar was now desperate to acquire every detail of British technology. The National Defense Research Committee established the MIT Radiation Laboratory, recruiting the best American scientists and engineers to develop radar systems based on British designs. Over the following months, the Tizard Mission shared everything. British scientists spent weeks at laboratories across America, explaining chain-home operations, demonstrating radar equipment, teaching techniques that Britain had learned through painful experience. The American response was extraordinary. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, starting with 0 staff in October 1940, grew to employ 4,000 scientists and engineers by 1945. It would develop dozens of radar systems that revolutionized warfare. But every system built on foundations the British provided. The SCR-584, which enabled Allied bombers to navigate and bomb through clouds, used British H-2S radar principles. The SCR-720, which gave American fighters all-weather interception capability, adapted British AI Mark IV airborne interception radar. The proximity fuse, which revolutionized anti-aircraft artillery, incorporated British research. The magnitude of American dependence on British technology became embarrassingly clear. Dr. Lee Dubridge, who directed the MIT Radiation Laboratory, admitted in a classified 1942 report that without British contributions, American radar development would be at least 2 years behind current status. British technology provided the foundation for every significant American radar system. American military officers who had dismissed chain home as impractical, crude technology now studied British operational methods intensively. Brigadier General Gordon Saville visited England in March 1941 to observe air defense operations. His report to Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall was humbling. Our earlier assessments of British radar capabilities were fundamentally wrong. We evaluated their technology without understanding how they integrated it into comprehensive air defense systems. The British have not just developed superior equipment, they have created entirely new operational concepts for using electronic detection to control air battles. Saville recommended that American air defenses adopt British organizational principles wholesale, including plotting rooms, sector control, and integrated command structures. The United States Army Air Forces began implementing these recommendations in mid-1941, essentially copying the British system that American observers had ridiculed 3 years earlier. The humiliation of American experts was complete. In less than a year, American military establishment had gone from mocking British radar as impractical to copying every aspect of British technology and operations. But perhaps the most revealing moment came in December 1940 when Dr. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, testified before a closed session of the Senate Military Affairs Committee. Senator Harry Truman asked Bush directly whether American radar research had wasted resources pursuing incorrect approaches. Bush's answer was remarkably honest. "Senator, we believed our technical approach was superior to British methods. We were wrong. The British, facing imminent invasion, made practical solutions work. We, facing no immediate threat, pursued theoretical elegance. Their desperation produced better results than our comfort." This admission that desperation breeds innovation better than comfort was profound. American research establishment operating with adequate funding and no urgent pressure had been outperformed by British scientists working with limited resources under constant bombing. The reasons for British superiority were complex, but came down to operational focus. British radar development was driven by immediate military needs. Every system had to work reliably under combat conditions or fighter command pilots would die. There was no room for theoretical exercises or elegant but impractical solutions. American development, conversely, emphasized technical sophistication over operational utility. Signal Corps engineers wanted mobile systems with higher frequencies, better resolution, and advanced features. Whether these systems actually worked reliably in combat was secondary to technical achievement. The British focused on making crude technology work. Americans focused on making sophisticated technology sophisticated. Combat proved that crude technology that worked decisively beat sophisticated technology that didn't. The Battle of Britain demonstrated this principle with brutal clarity. Chain home, with its primitive equipment and awkward procedures, functioned reliably day after day, providing the warning that saved Britain. American SCR-268 systems, technically more advanced, frequently failed under field conditions. By early 1941, American military leadership accepted that British radar technology and operational methods were superior across the board. The question became how quickly American industry could replicate British capabilities. The answer demonstrated American strengths. While British innovation was superior, American industrial capacity was overwhelming. Within a year of the Tizard Mission, American factories were producing radar equipment in quantities Britain couldn't approach. Western Electric began mass-producing magnetrons in January 1941. By year's end, production reached 1,000 units monthly. By 1943, American factories produced more magnetrons weekly than Britain made in the entire war. Similarly, radar sets that Britain produced in hundreds, America produced in thousands. The SCR-584 bombing radar, based on British H-2S, was manufactured in quantities exceeding 15,000 units. British H-2S production never exceeded a few hundred. This industrial superiority masked but never eliminated American dependence on British innovation. Every major American radar system through 1945 traced its lineage to British designs or concepts. American industry manufactured British innovation at American scale. The MIT Radiation Laboratory's history, published after the war, acknowledged this debt explicitly. British wartime radar development surpassed all other nations by wide margin. American contributions lay primarily in mass production, systems integration, and incremental improvements to British designs. Original innovation came predominantly from Britain. This admission was remarkable coming from American scientists, acknowledging that the United States had followed rather than led in radar development throughout the war. The operational impact of British radar technology on American forces was immeasurable. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, American radar coverage of Pearl Harbor was minimal and poorly operated. Japanese attackers achieved complete surprise, partly because American radar operators didn't understand their equipment or how to report contacts effectively. Over subsequent months, American forces learned British operational methods. The Guadalcanal campaign in late 1942 demonstrated improved American radar operation, with coast watchers and radar providing warning that allowed fighters to intercept Japanese raids effectively. By 1943, American forces operated comprehensive radar networks across the Pacific and in Europe, all based on British principles and using equipment developed from British technology. The naval war particularly demonstrated British radar's value. American destroyers equipped with British-designed fire control radar could engage enemy ships in total darkness with accuracy impossible before radar. Anti-aircraft systems using British proximity fuses and fire control radar devastated Japanese air attacks. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany depended absolutely on British radar technology. Pathfinder bombers using H-2S radar marked targets through clouds for following bombers. American B-17 and B-24 bombers navigated using British-developed G and oboe systems. By 1944, British radar technology, manufactured and deployed by American industry, had become so fundamental to Allied operations that imagining the war without it was impossible. If you want to explore more fascinating stories about how British and American technology shaped World War II and discover the incredible inventions that came from desperate innovation, subscribe now and join our community of history enthusiasts uncovering the real stories behind the technology that changed the world forever. The irony of American dependence on British radar was not lost on German intelligence. Luftwaffe technical officers examining captured American radar equipment in 1943 reported that it was essentially British technology in American packaging. A German intelligence summary from June 1943 noted, American radar development appears to be based almost entirely on British designs. The cavity magnetron that gives their systems such high performance is British invention. American contribution lies in mass production rather than innovation. This assessment was accurate. German scientists, who had been dismissive of both British and American radar capabilities before the war, now recognize that Allied radar superiority stemmed primarily from British innovation that American industry had multiplied. Germany's failure to develop comparable radar technology had multiple causes, but one factor was consistent underestimation of British capabilities. German leadership, like American leadership before them, assumed British technology was inferior to their own. By the time they recognized their error, the gap was unbridgeable. The post-war reckoning with American radar development's actual history was uncomfortable. Official histories emphasized American achievements while downplaying British contributions. The MIT Radiation Laboratory's published history acknowledged British help but focused on American innovation. Only in classified assessments did the full truth emerge. A 1948 Joint Chiefs of Staff study of wartime technological development concluded that British radar innovation was a decisive factor in Allied victory. American radar development before 1940 was inadequate and misdirected, and British technology transfer in 1940 provided foundation for subsequent American developments. This study recommended that future American military research emphasize practical operational utility over technical sophistication, essentially adopting the British approach that American researchers had mocked before the war. Individual scientists were more forthcoming. Dr. Luis Alvarez stated bluntly in a 1955 lecture that the cavity magnetron was the most important piece of Allied military technology developed during the war, more important than the atomic bomb in immediate military impact. Dr. Lee Dubridge wrote in his memoirs that without British radar technology shared through the Tizard Mission, American forces would have fought World War II with radar capabilities comparable to 1938 levels, a deficiency that would have made victory significantly more difficult, if not impossible. These admissions from America's leading scientists made clear that British technological superiority in radar was not marginal, but decisive, and that American mockery of British systems in 1938 reflected ignorance rather than insight. The cavity magnetron's impact extended far beyond military applications. Post-war magnetron technology enabled commercial radar, microwave communications, and eventually the microwave oven. Raytheon engineer Percy Spencer discovered microwave cooking accidentally in 1945 while testing magnetrons for radar. Commercial aviation became possible partly because radar enabled all-weather navigation and landing. Weather forecasting improved dramatically through radar observation of storm systems. Even modern cell phone networks use microwave technology descended from wartime radar research. The economic value of cavity magnetron-related technology in the post-war era exceeded hundreds of billions of dollars. All of it traced back to the device that British scientists brought to America in September 1940, offering their most valuable secret to a nation that had mocked their technology just 2 years earlier. The story of American radar development contains important lessons about technological assessment, the dangers of arrogance, and the value of operational focus over theoretical elegance. American evaluators in 1938 looked at British radar and saw crude equipment, awkward procedures, and vulnerable installations. They missed the integrated system that made the technology effective, the operational experience that British forces were accumulating, and the desperate innovation that comes from facing existential threat. British developers focused relentlessly on making technology work under combat conditions. They accepted that equipment would be crude, procedures awkward, installations vulnerable if the alternative was having nothing that worked at all. Perfection was the enemy of good enough. American developers pursued technical sophistication without comparable pressure to deliver operational capability. They assumed that elegant solutions would prove superior to crude ones, that theoretical advantages would translate to practical superiority. The Battle of Britain proved that operational effectiveness mattered more than technical elegance, that working crude systems beat sophisticated systems that didn't work, that desperate innovation under pressure produced better results than comfortable research without urgency. By the time American military establishment recognized these truths, Britain was alone, fighting for survival. Churchill's decision to share radar technology was born of desperation, but it also reflected confidence that British innovation was valuable enough to trade for American industrial capacity. The Tizard Mission represented one of history's greatest technology transfers, changing the course of the war and laying foundations for a post-war electronic revolution. It also represented vindication for British scientists whose work American experts had dismissed as impractical. When Henry Tizard returned to England in January 1941 after months in America, he reported to Churchill that American radar development would soon surpass British capabilities through industrial scale. British innovation had been successfully transplanted to American soil, where it would flourish with resources Britain couldn't provide. Churchill's response was characteristic. We gave them our secrets when they doubted us. Now they believe. That is worth more than any technology. Let us hope they remember who taught them when victory is won. Whether America properly remembered British contributions remains debatable. Post-war American histories tend to emphasize American radar achievements while minimizing British origins. British contributions are acknowledged but not featured prominently. The official history of MIT Radiation Laboratory, published in 1947, devoted just 40 pages to British contributions out of nearly 300 pages of text. American readers could easily conclude that American radar development was primarily indigenous achievement with some British assistance. Only in classified military studies and scientific memoirs did the full extent of British contributions become clear, and even there, the narrative often emphasized how American industry improved on British designs, rather than acknowledging that without British designs, American radar would have been years behind. The British, characteristically, didn't complain publicly. They had achieved their goal of bringing American industrial might into the war on their side. Whether Americans properly credited British innovation seemed less important than winning. But in private, British scientists noted the historical record's distortion with bemusement. Edward Bowen, who had demonstrated airborne radar to Americans in 1940, wrote in his private papers that American tendency to claim credit for British innovations was annoying, but understandable, given Americans' need to see themselves as technologically superior. Sir Robert Watson Watt, who pioneered British radar, was more pointed. In his 1957 memoir, he noted that Americans who had laughed at Chain Home in 1938 were claiming credit for radar development by 1945, conveniently forgetting their earlier skepticism. These observations reflected British frustration with American historical amnesia, but also British pride that their technology had proven so valuable that Americans wanted to claim it as their own. The ultimate assessment of British versus American radar development comes from comparing achievements. Britain, with limited resources and under constant attack, developed operational radar systems that saved the nation from defeat. Britain invented the cavity magnetron that revolutionized radar technology. Britain created integrated air defense systems that demonstrated how to use electronic detection effectively. America, with vastly greater resources and no immediate threat, developed technically sophisticated systems that didn't work reliably, underestimated British achievements, and required British technology transfer to achieve operational capability. Once American industry received British technology, American production and incremental improvement created radar systems that equipped Allied forces worldwide. American radar ultimately exceeded British capabilities through industrial scale, if not innovation. Both nations made essential contributions. Britain provided innovation born of desperation. America provided industry born of capacity. Neither alone could have achieved what they accomplished together. But the sequence matters. British innovation came first, provided the foundation, and made American achievements possible. American mockery of British radar in 1938, followed by desperate requests for British technology in 1940, captures this relationship perfectly. The story ends where it began, with Henry Tizard carrying cavity magnetron number 12 to America in September 1940. That single device, representing British innovation at its finest, changed the course of technology and warfare. American scientists who examined the magnetron recognized immediately that Britain had achieved what they believed impossible. American industry that manufactured magnetrons by the thousands proved that British innovation and American capacity were perfect complements. American military establishment that had mocked British radar learned that operational effectiveness mattered more than technical elegance, that desperation drives innovation, and that assuming superiority is dangerous when facing desperate enemies or desperate allies. The lessons transcend radar technology. In any field, operational focus beats theoretical sophistication. Desperate innovation under pressure produces better results than comfortable research without urgency. Crude systems that work beat sophisticated systems that don't. Most importantly, mockery of others' achievements reveals more about the mocker than the mocked. American experts who laughed at Chain Home in 1938 demonstrated their own ignorance, not British inadequacy. By 1940, those same experts were begging for British technology, acknowledging that everything they believed about radar superiority was wrong. That transformation from mockery to desperate need took just 2 years and one catastrophic failure to recognize innovation when confronted with it. Britain's gift of radar technology to America represented one of history's most consequential technology transfers, enabling Allied victory and launching the electronic age. That America initially mocked what it would later desperately need adds irony to the achievement, but doesn't diminish its importance. The cavity magnetron that crossed the Atlantic in September 1940 carried British innovation to American industry, transforming both. Britain got the industrial partner it desperately needed. America got the technology it didn't know it lacked. Together, they built the radar systems that won the war, detected enemy aircraft and ships across all oceans, guided bombers through clouds to targets, and demonstrated that electronics could extend human senses beyond imagination. All of it traced back to British scientists who persisted despite skepticism, who focused on operational utility over theoretical elegance, and who shared their most valuable secrets with allies who had mocked them just months before. Why America mocked Britain's radar, then begged for it in 1940 is ultimately a story about recognizing genius, about desperate innovation, producing better results than comfortable research, and about the danger of assuming technical superiority without operational validation. American experts learned these lessons the hard way, acknowledging that British technology they had dismissed as impractical was actually years ahead of American capabilities. The admission was humbling, but necessary. The radar that saved Britain in 1940 would save America and all Allied forces through 1945. That it came from the nation American experts had mocked made the gift more valuable, reminding Americans that innovation comes from unexpected places, and that mockery of others' achievements is foolish until proven in combat. The British gave America radar technology when America most needed it, but least expected to need it. In doing so, they changed warfare, launched the electronics revolution, and demonstrated that sometimes the best technology comes from those fighting desperately for survival, rather than those researching comfortably in laboratories. That is why America mocked Britain's radar in 1938, then begged for it in 1940. And why that transformation from mockery to gratitude represents one of World War II's most important and least understood stories.